It was 4 weeks ago that the New York Times disclosed that Donald Trump Jr. held that meeting with the Russians who offered negative research on Hillary Clinton, which the president's son confirmed, but not before issuing an initial statement that said the meeting was primarily about adoption. Now, the Washington Post revived that controversy this week with a story saying that first statement had been dictated, that's the word the paper used, by the president.
The statement that Don Jr. issued is true. There's no inaccuracy in the statement. The president weighed in as any father would based on the limited information that he had.
And the media decibel level on the president's credibility soared even higher when the Wall Street Journal disclosed that special counsel Robert Mueller has convened a grand jury. Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Ellison Barber, a Washington correspondent for Fox News. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist and a Fox News contributor. And Joe Trippi, Democratic strategist and also a Fox News contributor. Ellison, massive coverage of this Wall Street Journal story on the grand jury, which is a leak. Is it as dramatic a story as it seemed to play out in real time on CNN, on MSNBC, and on Fox?
I'm sure it is to someone, and I'm sure it's not to someone. That sort of seems to always be the issue with these Russia stories, right? Is someone is always going to say they think it's overplayed. I think when I look at it, I sort of look at it in a broad view of how I look at most stories. I see most stories as fitting in crudely into one of two categories: stories the public needs to know and stories they want to know. When it comes to most of the Russia-related stories, I think they fall into the category of need to know, because at this point a lot of them are legal questions simply because a special counsel exists. But when it comes to the issue of whether or not it's too much, I think sometimes people forget how powerful their voice is. If you don't like it, click something else, change the channel, or send an email. I think people tend to forget how often we actually do pay attention to those complaints in the media. And if it's overplayed, viewers, readers have a lot of power in dictating and letting us know that maybe we're going too far on.
Well, in this story, you could keep changing the channel until you got to the Cartoon Network. You were not going to escape. But Molly, you know, I have the take as a former Justice Department reporter that prosecutors routinely bring in grand juries to issue subpoenas, to hear evidence, to listen to witnesses. But the major media coverage suggests that was not the view in the press.
Well, I think it actually is absolutely a big story, but you mentioned anything related to Russia. And one of the more interesting leaks that came out about this was that Mueller is investigating things that have nothing to do with Russia, that have nothing to do with the 2016 elections. So I think part of the question is how you're covering it. And are you covering it with enough skepticism toward what we know about special prosecutors and how they run far afield of their original directions, and whether that's a good thing? I mean, there's been a lot of coverage of Mueller where they treat him like he is just beyond reproach, and it's like we have to forget how he botched that anthrax investigation, which was one of the worst, most mishandled cases that the FBI ever handled.
Director,
or his
right.
Close relationship with Comey. I understand everybody dislikes Trump and that they think that they've decided he's guilty and they're just waiting to find out the details, but a good journalist should be more skeptical about the entire process.
Now, some shows and some journalists and outlets were fair in explaining that having a grand jury doesn't necessarily lead to an indictment. It's a tool for prosecutors, but has it have a big psychological impact on the coverage, Joe?
Well, yeah, of course it has, but the other thing was obvious. I mean, Mueller's going to impanel a grand jury. That was going to happen.
The bombshell would be if he didn't.
Right, exactly. I mean, can we imagine if he had, after a year of counterintelligence investigation, come back, and him just recently being appointed came back and said, there's not going to be a grand jury, we're moving on to other things, and we're shutting down the office. Now, that would have been...
Well, in fact, though, if you don't find something out with what you are charged to be investigating, that's actually what you should be doing, is shutting down. And instead, what we're hearing, if we believe these anonymous sources, is that they're just going far afield of the original directions. You know, investigating things that have... There's no geographic limit, no time limit, no associate limit to what can be investigated.
That is true with the special prosecutor, but, you know, he hasn't been on the job that long, so I think it would take him a little long even to shut things down. But now, let's broaden this out a little bit. You've spent time in that White House briefing room. Are many reporters increasingly questioning whether the president, on various things, could be lying, might be lying, or is lying?
Probably. I mean, I think we've heard, and there have been a ton of different, I guess we want to call them hot takes, think pieces, whatever, on this issue of some people saying more journalists need to use the word lie and focusing a lot on how we cover things and getting down to the very specific words that we use. I think when it comes to specifically the lie and whether or not things are lies or if we should use that term, I just think for me as a reporter now, particularly with the political climate we're in, I find myself going back to dictionaries a lot more than I would have expected, triple checking myself to make sure, is this the word that I want to use? Because our words are very important, and I think sometimes it's important to say if a lie is a lie, say it's a lie and ask a question about it.
There have been real lies. I mean, when Flynn was fired because he lied to the vice president, then the president says, fires Comey and asks Comey, allegedly, to go soft on, let Flynn go.
So we don't part is in dispute. Now, the reason the lie thing comes up with the Don Jr. statement about that Russia meeting is that the president's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, initially said the president didn't have anything to do with that statement. Now the White House concedes that he weighed in to some degree.
Right. Well, so what we don't know is, did the lawyer know the different story that the president had weighed in or dictated? Or did Donald Trump not tell him? We don't know that. That's why they have the investigation.
In general, one of the things that's frustrating about media coverage of this is that there's so much over-promising and underachieving. So you're told that the president lied about something, and then you get the details, or that there was this false statement that was sent out by Don Jr. It turns out nobody's alleging that there was anything false about it. They're saying it was misleading. Well, that's kind of an interpretation. And I think journalists would have more success in their campaign against the president if they tempered the expectations by not being so dramatic about what they're saying.
And their campaign against the president, is that how you view the state of affairs right now? That most of the media are campaigning to undermine and discredit this president?
I mean, I think there's no confusion about that. Both sides are at war with each other, and there's a niceness about how honest everyone's being about that.
Now, there was this extraordinary leak this week to the Washington Post. Some of this had leaked out before, but the Post getting a hold of a transcript of President Trump's calls with the leaders of Mexico and Australia. And even there, you had some anchors and pundits saying, well, Trump lied when he denied that his call with the Australian Prime Minister was testy. But that could be described, couldn't that be described as normal diplomacy where you have a tough conversation in private and you kind of paper it over in public?
I will let the pundits describe it. I think to your point, that's something where it's out there. The only thing that I look at and worry about as a journalist is who is blamed or who is criticized for that leak being out there.
What about the fact of the leak? I mean, we were used to leaks at high levels of the administration, particularly this administration, but if a president can't talk to foreign leaders without having somebody who ostensibly works from leak it, that seems concerning.
Well, a number of national security experts have said that it is. I mean, you can look at Tommy Vietor, who was the National Security Council spokesperson under Barack Obama, said that he would have, I think he said, lost my mind if this had happened with transcripts of President Obama's calls. However, that being said, is that an issue? Is that a national security concern? Could be. As a journalist, that's not my problem or not my concern. If they want to worry about the leakers, that's one thing. But the Supreme Court has said, you go back to 1971 with the Pentagon Papers, that a leak is not necessarily problematic on a journalist side.
David Axelrod and others in the Obama administration said that this was a bad thing to have happened, that the president should have that ability to talk to foreign leaders without having
whether you support the president.
The question is, are you going after the journalists or are you going after the leakers? And I think that's a difference.
On this question of journalists challenging actions by the president, there was also a statement the president had said in various places that he had gotten positive calls from the leader of Mexico and from the head of the Boy Scouts. Look at ABC's Cecilia Vega raising that question in a briefing.
Why did the president say that he received a phone call from the leader of the Boy Scouts and the president of Mexico when he did not? Did he lie?
No, I wouldn't say it was a lie. It was that's pretty bold accusation. It's the conversations took place.
So now we're into the level of, was it a phone call or was it a personal conversation? And these are getting the level of lie, although clearly sometimes there are missteps and misrepresentations.
Right. So again, the problem here is that Trump said he had a phone call when instead he had an in-person conversation. Or he said that the leader of the Boy Scouts called him when it was various leaders of the Boy Scouts. And I understand that Trump has some petty narcissism and the way he massages his ego in order to make himself feel better can cause problems, that he is imprecise with these things. At the same time, the whole problem with media credibility is how they don't treat misstatements evenly. So Donald Trump saying that he talked on the phone instead of in person with the Mexican president didn't cause 8 million people to lose their insurance. But when Barack Obama said, if you like your health care plan, you can keep it, media treated that as just sort of general politicking. When the White House admitted that they did a campaign to get the Iran deal passed, everyone says, well, that's just business as usual. And if the media could handle other people if they could apply as much scrutiny to other people as they do they do Trump, they would have more trust.
But Joe, the president often speaks imprecisely. His supporters like that about him. He's not a focus group politician, and they view a lot of this as journalistic nitpicking. True or false?
They may view it that way, but the fact is it was the president of Mexico who said, I did not have a phone call with the president, reacting to the president's words. It was the leaders of the Boy Scouts who said, we did not have a phone call that the president said he had. That's what the press then reports. That's what leads them to ask those kinds of questions.
All right, let me get a break.